Paivepo Zuva began. Zefunde, Mnyaradzi responded, crossing his feet and settling down in a comfortable position. Let me tell you the story of a girl who built an army, Zuva said and continued. A long time ago, there lived a girl who had been abandoned by her mother in the forest and had been raised by a benevolent grandmother who had picked her up from the forest floor, taken her home, and made her a part of the family, along with the grandmother's 2 young grandchildren. When the girl Rashai was 14, she had met her mother in a cove, and within that cove, the girl had discovered that she was royalty, and indeed the firstborn child of a prince who later became king. Her mother had told the girl that she was the rightful leader of that kingdom, days away from the forest home she had found. To prove her link to royalty, the girl had discovered a bangle that her mother told her was proof enough for her to claim her title to royalty. Now in the kingdom Rashai stayed, there was a terrible famine that had seen the village migrating to moister regions. Now only the old, the very young, and the infirm stayed in the village, and they were dependent on Rashai and her 2 cousins, Revai and Mosha, to find them sustenance and feed them. On the day Rashai found the bangle, the 3 cousins had returned home and distributed their food findings to the rest of the village before sitting down by the fireside to chat. I can't believe you are a real princess, Revai was saying as she admired and twisted the bangle that now sat on Rashai's wrist. Princess Rashai, she said, shrugging. Sounds odd, but look at you, a real-life princess. Both Mosha and Rashai were staring at her in amusement. When Rashai had told her cousins of the possibility of being a princess, Revai had been the one to scoff and tell Rashai she was daydreaming. You know what's even more special? Revai was saying. I am a sister to a princess. Sister, she shook Revai, promise me you will find me a handsome and rich boy in your kingdom and command that boy to marry me. Being a very beautiful 15-year-old, Revai's heart was set on finding a good match when the time came for her to marry. Don't you think you're still too young to think of boys? Mosha, 15 years old, quiet, pensive, and the overthinking one asked. We should be concentrating on the next step. Where do we go from here? Rashai was quiet, looking at the adornment on your wrist, feeling its heavy weight, and also feeling a heavy weight in your heart about what had to happen next. I want to go, she said finally. I want to know where I am from. I want to know my heritage. Revai was nodding vigorously. That's a good idea, little sister. Your mother has already agreed to accompany us as she knows the way. I say we set off as soon as possible. But Rashai was shaking her head. We can't rush it. We have to think carefully about this journey. Remember, the woman in the cave was banished because of falling pregnant illegitimately, which means that any claim I have to the throne will be illegitimate. We can't just walk into a random kingdom and say, hey, I am the princess, give me what is due to me, because people will doubt me first and then fight me. Mosha spoke up too. You are right, Rashai. We have to think this through. And also, he was quiet for a while. What will happen to the rest of the villagers? Rashai's response was an instinctive, we go with them. But Revai was shaking her head and saying in a mocking voice, go with them where? Half the village is too old to walk. Another quarter or so has a missing leg, a chronic illness, or wants to remain in this kingdom to tend to the graves of their ancestors. And the other ones are too young and will make the trek to the kingdom difficult. We have to leave them, Mosha spoke. We can't leave them. They are dependent on us. Pa, Revai spat. We owe no one nothing. These people were left behind by their own families when they fled the famine. Why should we be the ones burdened by them? What would our grandmother have said? Rashai asked her sister. What would she have done? Okay, Rivai said, raising her hands in mock defeat. Suppose we do go with them. What bright idea will you use to ferry Mbuya Tadza, who has not stepped out of her heart since we were young, or Sakuru Moyo, whose mind sometimes wanders off? Huh? Rashai spoke. It is not as if we are going tomorrow. We should plan everything before we leave so that whatever comes our way once we reach that kingdom, we will be ready for it. I, for one, want to learn how to fight and to defend myself so that whatever comes my way while in the new kingdom, I will not be caught unawares. So when do we go? Rivai asked. Once we are ready, Rashai said as Mosha also spoke. I will teach you to fight, little sister. Don't worry about that. But what about your mother who still stays in a cove? I think we should get her, Rashai responded. We have a lot of space in this homestead since our grandmother passed away, and we sure could use a helping hand while ensuring that she does not run away again. Sure, Moshe said, but we should also find a hiding place for that bangle. It is too precious an adornment to be worn everywhere and in broad daylight. The following morning, Rashai and Moshe had to convince a reluctant Revai to accompany them to the cove. They found Rashai's mother, Mchanita, cowering in the dark place. I don't think I can go with you into the outside world, she said. I have not had human interaction for a long while. I want to stay here. I am safer here. It was up to Rashai and Moshe to coerce her. No one in the kingdom will mind, they told her. They will probably not care who you are as they have their own problems. It took a long while to convince her that by the time she finally stepped out of the cove, the sun had already started a westward descent. There's food inside the cove, she said. You can carry some to feed your people. When the three cousins went back to the cove, they used a lamp to search deeper, and there they saw baskets and bags of dried fruit, grain, and dried meats. Where did you get all this food? Moshe asked as he chewed on some nuts once they were back outside with Moshe. I have had years of nothing to do, Moshe responded. So in the evenings, I hunted and gathered. I never thought there would be a famine or that the famine would lead my daughter back to me. Take it as a gift from me to you during this difficult time. So they hauled what they could home, promising each other they would be back for more after the stash was finished. Mucha followed slowly behind them, he faced a mixture of shame and fear, even though Moshe continually assured her that she would be fine and that no one in the village would harm her. Once back home, Mucha visibly relaxed when she realized that people were only interested when they were told that she was Rashai's mother, and no one was questioning why she had abandoned her child as people wanted the food placed before them. That night, and every night after, Rashai, Revai, Moshe, and Mucha would sit by the fireside orchestrating. You all need to know the basics of fighting, Moshe said. We don't know what perils we will meet on our way or in Gara village, and seeing that the majority of the people we are living with are frail, it would do us good to ensure that every one of us who can wield a spear or a bow and arrow can fight. Rashai nodded and said, I am prepared to learn, brother. I want to start tomorrow. But Mucha said, I am too old to learn how to fight. And Revai said, imagine a woman holding a bow and an arrow. An abomination, I tell you. Moshe told the two of them, you have no option. You are going to learn to fight. Everyone who wants to go with us and who has hands should be able to hold a weapon, fight an enemy, and defend themselves. How are we going to break the news? Rashai asked. This question had been at the top of her mind since the idea of going to Gara had lodged in her mind. There is no way to break this news without breaking people's hearts. Revai volunteered, which is why I had suggested we leave without bidding people farewell. At least now there is food. We bring it from the cove and leave them with something while they wait for the rain. Moshe was shaking his head. We cannot do that, he said. We have a proverb that tells us to live with a clean conscience and great relations because where we go to is hidden from us. We can tell them tomorrow after the communal meal, Rashai said decisively. If there are any people who want to join us on the way and who want to train with us in the meanwhile, then they will join too. Mosha and Mucha nodded, while Revai hid a scoff in a cough. It was Mosha who the following night broke the news of Rashai's heritage and her impending journey to the east to the rest of the village. A princess, people gasped. Royalty, they said. But even though they were shocked, they were sadder. Everyone in the village had come to love the three siblings because of their selflessness, and they knew that it was because of this selflessness that they had not yet succumbed to death by hunger. But no one also wanted to impose on them to stay. They had already done so much, and if they had to leave, then that would be it. But Rashai spoke to the gathered villagers. My family, she said, my family and I have thought long and hard about it, and we know your health conditions, but we think it would be better for you to join us on the journey. While I do feel an urgency in my heart about going to this unknown home, I am prepared to wait for as long as it takes for Mbuyataza to put one foot before the other for us to reach this kingdom. I know you all feel an affinity to this land, even though it mocks us and laughs at us daily, and I promise that I'll try my best to bring those that want to come back here once we have settled in Gara. What about the bedridden? Someone asked. What about those that cannot walk and rely on crutches or the assistance of others? Another asked. What of the elderly? Another questioned. There was a sense of dejection within the gathered crowd. Rashai shrugged tiredly. She had known that they would ask this, but she had no response to it. But an old man, Sakuru, cleared his throat and spoke, his strong voice silencing the unsettled crowd. My brothers and sisters, he said, and children and grandchildren. For how long shall we hold these young children at ransom because of our hunger? They are young, and they too deserve to see this world. The girls shall marry and leave for their husbands' homes. What will happen to us then? No, we should bless those children and the journey they are about to take. They have been gracious enough to extend an invitation to us, and I think we should take it and go with them. Rashai was on her feet just as the old man stopped talking. Yes, the invitation to go with us stands, she said. My siblings and I are prepared to create hammocks and stretchers for those that cannot walk, and we will carry them. We are also prepared to teach everyone how to handle a weapon, as we do not know what lurks in the forest and where we are going. We also do not intend to start the journey immediately, and I believe that will give all of us the time to decide whether or not to be a part of the journey or to stay here. Even though the people nodded to the girl's words, once alone they spoke. This girl Rashai met a stranger in the forest who convinced her that she was a princess, someone said. Now she wants us to join her on this fool's errand. Where can I go with only one leg? A young man asked. How do I hope on this leg for days on end on a fool's errand? But Sakuru spoke. I don't care what you all say, but I am living with those children. If it means that I would take 10 steps a day, I would do so, follow in their wake, and help them in this quest that they will take. I will go with them too, a young woman, Jekai, spoke. My husband left with his other wives, and I could not go with them as I was heavily pregnant. Now my child is growing, and we can travel, and not knowing where to find my husband, I will go where fate leads me. As the villagers debated amongst themselves on who would go and who would leave, Mosha and Rashai, together with a reluctant Revai, began preparations for the journey. That first morning, after the village meeting and after fetching water from the brook, the trio rummaged the abandoned homes in the village, searching for all the weaponry that they could find. They gathered clubs and spears, bows and arrows, assegais and knives, and brought this back to the center of the village courtyard. Then Mosha instructed the girls to each pick a weapon that she was comfortable with. Rashai picked a small spear whose handle was so nimble that it fit perfectly in her hands, while Revai picked a club. As mid-morning came, Moshe began instructing the girls on how to throw a spear and how to handle a club. He created a makeshift life-size doll that they all used as a target, and by mid-afternoon, they were all tired. They prepared the communal meal, and after all were full, they joined Mucha in weaving bags. Remai, as always, was the first to object. You want to weave stretchers to carry people who want to live with us, yet the entire village is against leaving, she said. Besides, taking them with us is not a great idea anyway, as they will just slow us. But Moshe simply handed her some tree bark and some string and instructed her, weave. And they would spend the evenings by the fire, asking Mucha questions about Gara while placing bark and string over and underneath each other. It became their routine, fetching water and food from the cove in the mornings, then going back home to train with the different weapons at the different targets that Moshe made, then making stretcher beds and crutches for the rest of the villagers who were still to commit to going on the journey with them. Before long, however, villagers began to visit and watch them as they trained and parred, at first laughing at the sight of girls holding clubs and spears and bows and arrows. But when Moshe saw them sitting around and watching, disturbing the girls, especially Revai, who didn't want to be there in the first place, he told the spectators, either you join us in the learning to fight or you don't come to watch us at all. So bit by bit, the spectators joined, the old men regaling people of the olden days when they were as nimble as Moshe and had fought in the kingdom wars, and the younger boys and girls learning with as much gusto as they could, as there was nothing else to do in the village except watch the relentless sun rise, then set again. While they trained, the older women joined Mucha in weaving, in fetching water, and in preparing meals. A sense of purpose permeated through the village again. People began to have something to look forward to, and bit by bit too, they began talking of the journey in excitement. There was a sense of renewed hope amongst the people. But it was Rashai whose warrior spirit emerged with vigor. She dedicated her whole energies to the task before her with hunger, and she allowed Moshe to lead her, absorbing every lesson as though it were the last time she would hear of it. She took to the bow and arrow as though she had held the weapons all her life, and was beginning to hit the bull's eye each time with increasing ease, despite the ever-expanding distances with which Moshe would place the target, and everyone became in awe of her. I think you are now surpassing your teacher, Moshe would say jokingly, and I am proud of you, warrior. Rashai's growing prowess as a warrior was due to Mucha's words. They taught me out of the village, Mucha would tell her daughter when they were alone. They taught me to never return, myself and my offspring, and that should either of us return, then we would be beheaded. Mucha would also tell her that no one, except the prince whose seed had birthed Rashai, and an advisor named Jerry, whom Mucha thought would have passed by now, knew of Rashai and their heritage. Your claim to the throne will be disputed, Mucha told her, but you will have to prove that you are indeed royalty, and the bangle is just but one of the only artifacts that will back your claim. Rashai understood what this meant, that the moment she stepped in Gara and made her claim, nobody would be in any doubt as to who she was. It also meant she had to exude confidence and power once she reached her kingdom. So as she got better and better and became an even more proficient fighter, defeating even Moshe in their mock fights, people began to call her warrior. Soon enough, however, the day of departure drew nearer. The trio spent an entire afternoon going in and out of the cove, retrieving Musha's food stock and taking it to the edge of the village where the young and strong boys and girls carried it to the center of the village courtyard. The three cousins refused to address the mammoth issue before them, but that night, as they sat on the peripheries of the communal bonfire, Revai nudged their little sister by the elbow. "Speak now," she said. "We need to finalize our itinerary." Rashai looked over at Mosha, who smiled encouragingly, and she stood, a hint of timidity in her posture. But the moment her mouth opened, the timidity was gone, and the voice of a leader emerged. "Hello again, everyone," she said. "A couple of moons ago, my siblings and I told you of the journey we intend to take eastward as I seek my paternal heritage. We also told you of the intention to go with those of you who are comfortable, and we have already made provisions for self-traveling for those who wish to go. We do not want to impose the decision on you, and those that wish to stay, we have set aside some food to help with sustenance. Now, we will leave before the moon waxes, which is 5 days away, and we would like all those that wish to go with us to begin packing. We would also like to know who amongst you here would like to go with us, so we are sure that the stretches and the crushes and all other needs for an effective journey are made. Those who are going with us can raise their hands." A couple of hands shot up, and neighbors looked at each other before other hands slowly joined them, until there were only 8 very elderly people whose hands were not raised. Mbuya Zoro, whose hand had not been raised, spoke. "My children, my peers and I have decided to stay. We are too old to travel, and we may die before we go too much further, and we might delay the journey because of the funeral rituals you will have to make. What we ask of you before you leave, however, is to bring us closer together so that we are not too spaced and so that we can spend our last days with each other." A young woman with an amputated hand also rose. "Me too, I'm staying," she said. "I will be able to help the elderly with their duties and prepare meals for them. I realize that with my one weak hand, I might be of better use here than in the forest where the enemy might lurk. So please accept my apologies." The trio nodded, and so too did the crowd. Sakuru spoke, addressing the young woman. "Thank you, Tau Manangu, for remaining with the elderly. May their ancestors look over you." Preparations for departure thus began in earnest. The individuals who would be remaining were all brought closer together, and the remaining food was placed in a central hut. Revai took Tau to the cove and showed her the mushroom and the brook with which she would fetch water from. Mosha asked all the members of the party to pick the weaponry they were comfortable with before wrapping up the remaining weapons in a large bag and placing it by the piles of goods that would be used on the journey. Mucha and Rashai went around those who had committed to the journey, distributing the clothes and stretchers that had been sewn for future use. The villagers packed the goods they wanted to carry with them on the journey and locked their doors. On the final day, Rashai, Mosha, and Revai went to bid farewell to Mbuya Taka's hut. Nostalgia and reminiscence gripped them, and they all smiled, remembering their grandmother's kindness and the nourishment she had given them. Then Revai broke down, tears escaping her eyes, and Mosha drew both girls into an embrace where the 3 of them wept. When they finally broke apart, Rashai said, "I will miss this place, my first home." Moshe said, "I will be back once Rashai has settled, and famine or no famine, I will return to safeguard the land of my forefathers." The next evening, as the newly waxed moon began its downward descent, the villagers met in the central courtyard. There they bade farewell to those who were remaining. Then Rashai broke out of the clearing and said, "Let's go," before linking her palm to her mother's and leading the trek into the unknown. Their journey started off well, and by the end of the first night, they had walked as far into the forest as the furthest place Mosha had ever visited. They found a clearing where they quickly set up camp, preparing breakfast and taking time to feed before sleeping the morning and part of the afternoon away. When they woke up, they refreshed themselves in an almost dry stream, ate again before picking up their camp and following Mucha's lead. Their going was slow as some of the party were very old people and very young people, and some had infirmities that made it difficult for them to walk quickly. But walk they did, singing songs at times, but other times too tired to sing or to speak. They ate what they caught in the forest, and Rashai, practicing her newfound bow and arrow and spear skills, helped to bring game to the table. Their going was also uneventful, as they did not meet any pack of wild, feral, and ferocious animals or any other people, dangerous or otherwise, which was a relief for Rashai, Revai, and Mosha. Every day, Rashai would ask her mother, "How far along are we now?" To which Mucha would reply, "We are almost there, we are almost there." Tragedy, however, struck on the 8th day when the party was intercepted by a band of rogue renegades. Their attack had been quiet and stealthy, the attackers waiting for the party to settle for the afternoon before they had grabbed the most beautiful girl they had ever seen and vanished with her into the forest. When the party awoke, invigorated and refreshed, in the late afternoon, Revai was nowhere to be found. At first, everyone thought she had gone to relieve herself, and when she didn't return within a reasonable time, Mosha and Rashai and a few other party members rounded the perimeter of the camp, shouting for her and searching for the prints of a wild animal that could have devoured her, but there was no luck. A sense of hopelessness and helplessness came to envelop Rashai, and as she hugged herself against the westerly wind, a small voice taunted her, "It is your fault. It is your fault. Inviting all these people here on your own journey? Now look. It is your fault." Unbidden, tears began to flow down her face as she thought of Revai's dreams of finding a boy from a rich family. She thought too of all of her sister's fancy dreams and how these would vanish should they fail to look at her, and her heart broke. But Rashai was startled out of her reverie when she felt a pair of hands frantically nudging her. She looked down, and it was Nasha, the little mute girl whose parents had abandoned her as they fled the famine, believing that the girl's misfortune had somehow contributed to the curse that had befallen the land. Now the girl stood beside Rashai, gesticulating excitedly and pointing in a northern direction. Mosha, who had been coming to talk to Rashai, saw the little girl's wild gesticulations and rushed forward. "Where?" he was asking the little girl as he crouched in front of her, his eyes at the same level as her young ones. Nyasha made grunting noises as she pointed to the north again. Then she pulled her chin to show a beard, spread her tiny arms to show the hulk of the captors, and pointed north again. Mosha quickly called for reinforcement from the little army he had built, and all of them, young and old men and women, brandished their weapons and carried some on their shoulders in heaps, and they all followed. Dusk was beginning to gather, but they found a track. Several large feet and a pair of feet that looked to have been dragged were on the ground. They followed the trail until they reached its end by the entrance to a cave. But before Mosha could organize his tiny army, a flock of arrows whizzed over their heads, and one hit one of their men in the head, and the man floundered and fell to the ground, his eyes quickly glazing, then staring sightlessly into the darkening sky. Mosha panicked as he had not expected any battle to occur so soon, but his panic grew even worse when he looked around and saw that they were surrounded by a group of strong, buff men whose eyes were red and hungry for a fight, and whose bows and arrows and spears were cocked and ready. Rashai, sensing Mosha's panic and the growing fear in their small army, sprang to the front and took charge, shouting, "Who are you?" to the army encircling them. "Give us our girl." The army laughed and someone spat. "Pah, a girl. What do we do with a girl?" Ignoring the sense of defeat in a small army, Rashai quickly drew her spear and with the aim of a seasoned fighter, directed to the disdainful men, and thwack it struck. The army around them was momentarily struck at the girl's bravery and skill, but that momentary lapse was enough to reinvigorate Mosha and the rest of the tiny army, and they quickly remembered their lessons and they struck. The battle was intense, and there were casualties on both ends. The opponents knew the lay of the land and could hide quickly, while the Rashai and Mosha army hid to find footing. But the Rashai and Mosha army also had a fresh skill that they had built in the intervening months, and they put up a show so big that even the opponents who had underestimated them were beginning to fear them as more and more of their men fell. The battle was, however, brought to a quick, decisive end when an elderly voice spoke above the fighters and said, "Stop, children, stop this unnecessary spilling of blood." Everyone stopped in their tracks and looked over to the voice, and Rashai saw Sakuru standing before them, illuminated by the light of the stars and the waxing moon, and resting his frame on his cane. "Why are you all fighting?" Sakuru asked. Sakuru had seen the little army leave the camp, and he had followed them as slowly as his hobbling legs and cane could allow him. He knew the little army could be impulsive, and he wanted to intercept them before it was too late. "Who are you, old man?" the leader of the opponents asked, his bow cocked and his arrow pointing at the old man's head. "I am Sakuru," he said. "I am tired from following my children. Will you not be hospitable enough to bring me a chair and sit me close to a fire? Or do you not have manners to help an old man who has walked a long way to stop this folly?" The leader of the opponents hesitated. Then he signaled for his men to drop their hands. Rashai also signaled for her army, and they too dropped their hands but not their weapons. The opponent's leader signaled for a chair, and someone brought it, while another brought some hot embers, broke twigs and firewood, and started a fire. Sakuru sat close to the fire and said, "Clear the borders." He shook his head. Such an unnecessary waste of life. He spoke as both armies carried the borders away. When they were done, the old man said, "Sit," and both small armies sat on opposite sides of each other. Then he asked the opponents, "Why did you take the girl?" The leader of the opponents spoke. "You are in our territory," he said, "and we do not know what brings you here. So we took her because it was a message to tell you we do not want you here." Sakuru nodded and said, "We apologize for invading your territory. We, however, have no intentions of staying here long, as we have a journey to finish and a quest to complete. Who knows, had you not taken the girl, we might have been well on our way and perhaps out of your territory." The opponent's leader was silent. Then he asked, "Who are you? And what is this quest you are on?" Sakuru chose his words carefully. "We are fleeing a famine in our land, and we intend to find a village to settle our weary souls in. If only you could give us back our girl, and we will be out of your territory and on our way." "And the quest?" the leader asked again. "We will tell you about it after you have told us who you are and what a group of young men is doing in the forest without homes," Sakuru said. The opponent leader looked thoughtfully at the small army before him. Then he nudged a young man who stood and spoke. "We are the lost tribe of Gara," the young man said. "We fled our kingdom when the last king targeted us and our family members for execution for the silly crimes we were said to have committed. Crimes such as laughing at the king's belly or not bowing low enough when he passed. We fled too because we were tired of the oppression we were subjected to. We wanted to build our army and fortify it before we went back home to claim the land of our forefathers," the young man said. Sakuru was nodding his head. Then again he spoke, choosing his words with wisdom. "I understand and I empathize with your plight, young man," he said. "I do hope that one day you will return to the land of your forefathers." Sakuru took a deep breath, then spoke again. "We too are on a journey to Gara, and we have with us a Gara princess." He pointed at Rashai. "Her mother was banished after she fell pregnant for the prince, and for years the girl has lived in our land. But now she goes home and we accompany her. The leader of the opponents looked piercingly at Rashai, then a bellow of laughter rose out of his throat, and all the other men on his army joined in the laughter too. Rashai shivered, apprehension and fear fighting in her as she realized the kind of reception she would get in Gara. But the leader spoke again and said, "We can tell she is royalty from the way she fights. I was beginning to fear her wrath during our skirmish." Then he turned to Rashai and said, "My princess, welcome. The oracle has spoken of you. I do not envy the journey that is before you, but us as the lost tribe of Gara do pledge our support as you undertake this journey if you will allow us. If you need reinforcements, we are here to back you, princess." "What oracle?" Rashai asked in a small voice, but the leader was beckoning to someone in the cave, and someone led Revai out of the cave, who came rushing and falling into Rashai's lap. "We did not harm the girl," the leader was saying, "but we need to rest for tonight. You can return to your camp, but in the morning we can talk of how you can enter Gara, and we can also lend you some of our brave soldiers. You are welcome to take your girl and go back." That night, after the celebrations over Revai's return and Revai's assurance that she was all right, Rashai settled down to sleep. There was no need to travel after the excitement of the night, they all agreed. As sleep snatched her, she felt her spirit lift out of her and transport her to a dark hut by the edge of a village. In it sat an obese king and an old man who was speaking in a strange trance. Rashai could only hear snippets of what the old man said. "Beware of the seed you bore, the rightful king of Gara. The kingdom will be wrestled from your hands." Then she saw the old man's head on the ground, unblinking, detached from the body. Rashai was startled awake, but sleep snatched her again. This time she saw the old man's detached head talking directly to her. "Who are you?" Rashai was asking frantically, but the head told her in a slow voice, "Cram this riddle. Keep it in your mouth at all times. Let's go. In the forest deep, a king wants blood. In places too steep, where only hunters tread, a noble once ceased, there lies some peace, a song in its mouth for another noble to pick." The detached herd kept singing the words, forcing Rashai to cram them over and over and over again. Then at last it said, "Never forget these words until your ascendancy." Rashai awoke. She felt refreshed, but also fearful of the dream and of what lay ahead. A part of her wanted to tell Moshe and Revai of the dream, but there was a hustle and a bustle in the camp as the lost tribe of Gara arrived, and negotiations of how to enter Gara began. "Let only the ones who are strong enough to fight go," the leader of the lost tribe, Farah, was saying. "Everyone else stays here in the forest until it is safe for them to settle in Gara. They can go to the caves where there are better provisions and stay there." So preparations were made and the two opposing armies became one. Farah and Rashai became co-leaders, and together they worked a solution as to who would give direction and when. As the older women and men who were part of the village went to the caves where the elements of weather were not as harsh, Rashai tried to persuade her mother to stay behind. But Mucha refused, insisting that she was a part of the army and she wanted to fight too. Once everyone was settled, the army began its trek. As there were no individuals to slow them down, they covered the remaining distance to Gara within hours. When they arrived in the kingdom, all was quiet, and the little army looked askance at each other, wondering where the people were. The two leaders beckoned at them to follow, and they ventured further in until they could hear the sound of music and festivities. They followed the sound, which grew louder and louder until they arrived in the village area. "A coronation," Farah said to Rashai. "The new king, who is your younger brother, is being crowned as king right now." And there the young man was, sitting on a throne in the center of the arena, an elderly man standing and speaking beside him. An emotion that Rashai could not describe gripped her, and before anyone could restrain her, she had torn through the shocked crowd and rushed into the arena calling, "I am the true queen of Gara." A stunned hush fell across the crowd, and they all looked at this young, beautiful girl in surprise and wonder. Who was she? They all thought. But behind Rashai, Mucha's eyes had met Queen Fadzai's glare, and the two women glared at each other with familiarity and resentment for the longest time. The end. Munyaradzi looked at the storyteller in wonder, then said, "Wow, a new king being crowned the same day the real queen appears? Please tell me more. What happened next?" But Zuva was laughing. "You have to be patient, my boy. Now, run on home. I will see you when you get back." The real end. Thank you once again for coming to my channel and listening to this and the other stories here. I appreciate the love you have all been showing me. The Zuva series continues next week with the battle of queenship and kingship, so please stay tuned for Saturday. In the meantime, please like, comment, subscribe, and share, and you can let me know what you think will happen next. Lots of love. Bye.